for joining me today. I'm Tracy from Sunspiral, and I should be live on LinkedIn, Twitter, and hopefully on YouTube. This is the first week I've actually tried out on YouTube, so it'll be interesting to see how that actually works out. If you are watching live, it will be great if you could drop me a comment or say something in the chat. But I do appreciate that when people do watch, they do tend to watch later on, because it stays on those platforms as a recap. So, what am I doing here this morning? Well, I'm here to talk about feedback. As you probably know, what I do is I do a podcast episode every Monday on the Little Spiral podcast, and that is to talk about different aspects and facets of personal development. And this week's episode was about feedback, and I talked about different reasons that you might give and receive feedback. And also some tips and techniques for giving feedback. What I wanted to do with this session, it's only going to be sort of a 10-15 minute session, is to talk through one of my sort of favorite means of delivering sort of quick effective feedback, which I'm going to go through shortly. I've got a couple of slides to go through. um, so if you, as I said, if you want to interact, if you've got any questions, if you've got any feedback, do just sort of pop onto the chat and or pop into the comments and let me know. So with with the podcast on feedback, I talked in quite a lot of detail about a means of giving longer feedback. But with this session, because I only want to do sort of 10 minutes, I wanted to go through the sort of the short quick version. And for that, and I know many other people use a method called the shit sandwich. Now, I'm only going to say that once. I've got some slides that I'm going to pop up in a second, but um just to talk a little bit about that, the shit sandwich, okay, I said it again, is a means of giving feedback quickly and effectively, but it is often misused. And because of that, or sort of misunderstood, and because of that, I wanted to talk a little bit about it, and just about when you would use it and when you wouldn't use it, and what it is and how to use it most effectively. So I'm going to pop some slides up now, and hopefully you can see those on the screen. So you should be able to see, on the left hand side, a little sort of green, red, green sandwich. So what you do with this method is, when you're giving feedback, you start off with, at the top, with a genuine positive assessment. So something positive about what you're talking about. So it could be someone's asked you to give feedback on a live chat, or on a presentation, or on a piece of work that they've done. I wouldn't use this method for giving detailed feedback, and I'll come on to talk about that shortly. But if you're just trying to appraise something, particularly around someone's performance, then this is a really good method of doing it. Starting with a genuinely positive assessment, and then moving on to more specific critique. So if you're saying something that might be perceived as being negative, not, we use positive and negative so often, don't we? But it's more like, if there's something that is a basis for improvement, then you would put that in the middle of the sandwich. And then you would move on and summarize a positive final point or summary. So you can see why it's called what it's called. I think sometimes it's referred to as the bad news sandwich, and I don't really like that, because, as a description, because it makes it look as if you're hiding bad news within sort of disingenuous positives, and I don't think that's how it's effectively used. I've seen criticism of using this method, I think, when I've done some research on YouTube, and I mentioned this in the podcast. I've seen people say, don't use this method because it's so silly. You'll say something like, oh, that sandwich you made was really nice. By the way, your report was rubbish, but your hair looked good. That is absolutely not the way, or the reason that you would use this kind of feedback. You would use it to, well, I think, as someone giving feedback, what this method does is it gives you responsibility for finding positive things to say about something. So if you can't find positive things to say about something, then just don't use that method. Use a different method, which I'll come on to. Similarly, if you've got detailed feedback that you need to give, or you've got a list of many improvements that need to be made, then again, this isn't quite the right method, and sandwiching all of that within two positive things may again seem a little bit disingenuous. But as a quick means of doing it, it's very helpful. And I like to use it because, as I've put on the slide here, there is normally something positive to say about something, but there is normally room for improvement as well. So even if something was really good and you watched a presentation that someone done saying, and you thought it was amazing, there might have been nothing, there might be nothing to improve on, but normally there is. So you can use this method to kind of talk about the positives, but also put some room for improvement in there. I find personally that people are quite mistrustful of solely positive feedback. If I only say good things to them, I don't feel like they trust my judgment, because they will be expecting something that that shows a need to work towards improvement. Also, I like to be able to start and end on a positive note. So if I'm finishing up a conversation, I like to wrap it up with something good, with something positive. But I also like to go in with something positive as well, so that I can come in and say, yeah, this bit I really appreciated. I liked what you did here. I wasn't quite sure about this, and this aspect, but overall, I think that these things worked, and I really enjoyed it. And that way, you're not just doing this bad news sandwich thing. You're actually structuring things in a way that I think people are happier to take away than if you just solely focus on positives or solely focus on negatives. Again, I'd only make positive points if they were genuine. I'd never make something up just to use this method. So if there wasn't anything positive to say, then I would try and find structured ways to work through how I can help someone to get improvement. Um, I think, as I've said on the slide, you might not be able to see it particularly well. If you are only able to talk, if you don't notice anything and usually there's something positive, isn't there? Even if it's just that you're praising someone's effort, you're praising the work that they've obviously put into what they're doing. So normally you can find something positive to say, but if you really can't, then rely on different methods. There's the SBI method, so the situation behavior impact technique, and I talk about that in the podcast. So if you're interested in learning a bit more about that, then jump onto the podcast. I'll put a link in the description, and you can learn a little bit more about that technique. Now, I've actually got some feedback to share with you. And this is some feedback that, again, I share on the podcast, that I received from Ben about the podcast. So you can see the green, red, green structure there, and I'll just read through. Totally, this is totally genuine feedback that I absolutely received on the podcast. So I think overall you're doing a great job, and I like the focus on different topics each week. The only criticism I would have is that occasionally it doesn't seem like there is enough breathing space between segments, so it can seem a little rushed when people actually respond better to natural pauses and thinking words and verbal punctuation in speech, so that might be something to focus on. On the whole, though, it's a very honest reflection of you and the way you talk and your thoughts, and I enjoyed listening to it. So you can see there, he's given me positive, negative, positive, but it's all done in a structured way that, for one, looks to gain improvement, and for two, sort of sandwiches that critique within wholly positive summarizing that makes it much easier for me to take on, and for me to then want to work with. So rather than just going away and thinking, yeah, that was great, or oh, that was awful, in that binary way that I can sometimes do, like a lot of us can sometimes do, can't we? I've actually got a means of working through it, and I've received that feedback in in an overall positive way, but with structured room for improvement. So I hope that makes sense. I hope that you can see that it it may not be right in every situation where you're where you want to give feedback to someone or where someone's asked you for feedback, but it is a useful way to give quick feedback on, say, someone's performance or something like that. If you need to give a lot of detail, and if you need to give a lot of examples and pinpoint very, very specific things, one specific thing I think works fine. But if it's a list of things that you need to go through, again, it may not be the best technique. But for a, for a quick summary feedback, think shit sandwich. And I promise that's the last time I'm going to say that. So just moving on within the slides, if you are interested in having a look at the podcast, the Little Spiral podcast is, I put a new episode on every Monday, and then I'm trying to do a follow-up live chat on the Wednesday. I was doing it on the Tuesday, but I just found that um, I wanted to give a bit more of a gap just to think through interesting things to kind of talk about on the live stream. So if you're interested in having a listen, it's sunspiral.co.uk/p/podcast. But as I said, I will put a link in the comments across the social media platforms. So that's all I wanted to talk about today. I'm just going to unshare my screen. As I said, if you do want to comment, if you want to have a chat about any of this stuff, just go onto the platforms and comment. As I said, I know a lot of people don't necessarily watch these live, but will follow up and watch them later on. So even if in the next couple of days, if you think of anything that you'd like to share, if you don't agree with me, if you feel that it's actually a weaselly way of squirreling negatives away, then I'd like to know. I'd like to know your thoughts on it. I'll be back next week. The podcast episode is on, that's a good question. I can't even remember what the next topic is. But I will pop that in the chat as well, so that you can sort of stay up to date with what we're doing. And then I'll do the podcast on the Monday, and then I'll follow up with the live chat on the Wednesday. So lovely to engage with you, and please get in touch if you'd like to. Bye now.